Welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight we have special guest, documentary filmmaker Darcy Weir. But before I introduce him, check out C60 Purple Power. It's the most powerful antioxidant on the planet, helps with energy levels, skin problems, infections, eyesight, brain cognition, EMF radiation, and a lot more. It's a free radical sponge that gives your body the ability to heal itself. And if you use promo code GIANTS10 from the link in the description, you'll get 10% off your entire purchase. I highly recommend it. I've been using it for over a year now with my own money, and I wouldn't recommend something that doesn't work. So some of you all know that my friend, extra dimensional reptilian channeler Anthony from Canadian Awareness, very honorable and genuine guy, and we've become good friends. He was on my show around a year ago, and a lot of you have been requesting him to come back on. And I have a date for that. He will be returning Friday, December 30th, 9 p.m. EST, 6 p.m. PST. But he started a new podcast on his YouTube channel, and he has a little message for you guys. Here it is.
Greetings to everyone at Raised by Giants podcast in California, and a very special hello to my friend Ryder Lee, someone who I've had a pleasure to speak with many different times off camera, including on camera on his very podcast in January of 22. My name is Anthony. I'm an extra dimensional channeler of a Theta Tauran race, and I'm located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, the very same city of Toronto, where I have a brand new podcast called Canadian Awareness Podcast, launched in November of 22. And with this message, I wish to invite everyone at Raised by Giants podcast to take a look at my new podcast and some of the interviews I've conducted, but also many that I plan on doing in 23, and speaking to and conversing with different brilliant minds of this industry of channeling, ufology, extraterrestrial contact, spirituality, and talking about some of the most controversial but also deep galactic, cosmic, interstellar subject, variety of different intelligences that I plan on discussing, concentrating on the most important thing, and that is which is the aim and the mission of the podcast, which is human empowerment. So again, I wish to invite everyone to take a look at Canadian Awareness Podcast and find out for yourself if you resonate with what we have to say, and I hope to see you all there.
That was Anthony from Canadian Awareness, and he will be returning to the show on Friday, December 30th. Mark it on your calendars and go over to his YouTube channel called Canadian Awareness and subscribe. So without further ado, introducing tonight's guest, Darcy Weir. Darcy is a documentary filmmaker who has chosen to work on some of the more fascinating subjects that are discussed today. He has completed over 10 feature-length documentaries, which are all available through Tubi TV and Amazon Prime. He recently completed a new documentary based on the history of Bitcoin to date. The film also covers the nebulous cryptocurrency market. His latest film is Secret Space UFOs, NASA's first missions, which focuses on the first NASA space missions before Apollo and all of the UFO related events to do with those very first classified missions ran by NASA and the military. Hello and welcome to the show, Darcy. Thanks so much for coming on, brother. How are you doing?
I'm good. I am ready to go here, and glad to be here. It's been a while, man. We met starting of 2021 at UFO MegaCon.
Yeah, at the Laughlin UFO MegaCon, and I watched your documentary there that you had just made on the secret space program about the Apollo missions, and it was very, very interesting because you're talking about a completely opposite thing than what a lot of these secret space program assets and these super soldiers and people are talking about. And I just watched your most recent documentary titled Secret Space UFOs and NASA's first missions. And I have to say, my friend, you've come a long way, not only in your research, but in your production and producing quality of your films. It's really good.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, I think what you saw during the Laughlin MegaCon was more of like a prototype film, but I was trying to jam in all these facts and strange, mysteries about early space history anomalies, right? And I've been doing this with the help of a bunch of different researchers, really. There's a huge camp of secret space researchers. Forgive my camera, I don't know why it's doing this in and out autofocus thing. But there's a huge camp of researchers out there that have just dug their heels in on this story that we're being visited by, let's say, orb being alliances and bird people, and there's a Draco reptilian war going on, and Barack Obama has been up there on Mars, and he is part of the front, fighting off these malevolent aliens and stuff. And I'm not really part of that camp, but I am interested in what's going on in space and what we can put our finger on in terms of strange anomalies as well as possible UFO events.
Absolutely. And I think that the whole secret space program and the super soldier stuff is a huge cover up for that. It's a huge cover up to get people distracted about what's really happening. That there is a secret space program, but it's nothing like, it's really rudimentary, and it's in its like kind of its early phases, right?
Yeah.
And the secret space program assets and all that have just exaggerated the story and created this entire narrative of nonsense and, quite frankly, bullshit. I mean, excuse my language here, but it's complete bullshit. And I've been trying to really blow the whistle on that on my channel for around 8-9 months now, really digging down deep into this stuff and figure out the reason of why they would be trying to cover this up, because it's been a really big detriment to real secret space program researchers, right?
Yeah.
Like Dr. Joseph Farrell, like Walter Bosley, like they're kind of like afraid to even talk about it anymore, because we've had this whole exaggerated secret space program, time travel, regenerative technology, highly advanced technology, fighting aliens in space, age regression, laser beams, highly advanced interdimensional craft, and like all this nonsense
Yeah.
about it, that it's really muddied the waters of really what's happening. And Corey Good just came out and said that it's all fake and it's all made up. That's basically what he said on that deposition. That
Yeah.
that's not his exact words, but if you listen to the entire deposition, he pretty much says that he created all of it, that he made
Yeah.
it all up.
One of my good friends online, Alara, who was in my TR3B documentary I did over a year ago now. She has a channel on YouTube called Space Force News, and her whole shtick, like her whole channel, is dedicated to just talking about what's going on in space, military wise, anomalies wise. It's really a great channel. And she puts a lot of factual research into what she does. She looks at like anything we can get our hands on in terms of news and releases, and that's really good work. She likes to equate, the whole Corey Good tribe to being like essentially just a massive LARP, like people that are think that they're playing some kind of Lord of the Rings fantasy, but in space. And I tend to agree with her. It really doesn't bring anything to ufology. It takes away, because if you think about it, people are so interested in disclosure now, right? It's really coming to a head with the Odysee releases possibly coming out soon on some clarity in terms of you know actual analysis coming out of NASA, even because NASA is interested in hunting UFOs all of the sudden, which is like BS in my opinion too. They've always known about the phenomenon. They've always been part of the research when they've had to be pulled in, and especially when it comes to UFO anomalies in space, they've been part of the cover up. So I think it's crazy what's happening in terms of them being part of this big press junket now. But what I'm saying is, you've got a lot of interest in UFOs right now around the world. And then you've got the whole Corey Good tribe and millions of people. Their energy, their efforts, and their interests are being sunk into that LARP, and it
Yep.
takes away from all of the serious stuff that's been going on, the real stuff, you know? So that's why I've been doing these documentaries and this sort of series called Secret Space UFOs and then whatever. And yeah, I've been working with Kerry Martinuk, a guy I partnered with. He's my friend, fellow Canadian. He had a channel called Luna Cognita, and we've repurposed a lot of his research. He actually sent me new stuff that's never been published, and I've been like retreating that and upresing that and getting that into these docs. A lot of the stuff you saw in NASA's first missions is from hard drives he sent me. And then you've got people like Richard Dolan, who's a really great historian on this whole subject, and has looked into this stuff greatly in detail. And I'm kind of making my little cameo in there. I've got a little voice in this, just trying to put together a chronology to how things are going in terms of space history and strange anomalies. Um, and then, all the astronaut testimony you've got. I'm working on a doc right now where I interviewed James Fox. He has a really interesting story that pertains to an astronaut and something that happened to him and this astronaut in terms of UFOs. And Mike Barra, I recently started working with. He was responsible for writing Dark Mission with Richard Hoagland, which is a fantastic book about what supposedly is going on the moon, what theoretically NASA has been doing up there or had been doing, and all these anomalies that are present in photos from the NASA archives. And we're kind of breaking that down in this other doc I'm working on now, which is focusing mainly on Apollo. The one you just watched is like X-15, Mercury, and Gemini
The
in that
test
order.
missions. Yeah.
Yeah, they were considered the bridge to the moon, because you can't just like go, okay, we're going to the moon, and like, put a couple guys in a rocket and shoot it up there. They had to figure out, okay, how do we orbit in a capsule around the Earth in space? All right, done. How do we do a spacewalk? How do we like depressurize the capsule so we don't kill ourselves and don spacesuits and then walk out into space and observe something from our spacesuits and do technical operations in our spacesuits? Okay, done. Now, how do we go deep into cislunar space, which is the void between Earth and the moon? All right, let's take the capsule there, do some of our operations there, do a spacewalk, done. Now, how do we get to the moon? And the Apollo missions were all about, um, first of all, they upgraded all of their technology. So the capsule was brand new. They ditched the redstone capsules from Gemini and Mercury. They had whole new capsule, CSM, the Columbia, which is what Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and they flew to the moon and eventually landed. And all the missions before that in the Apollo run up to 11, they were just figuring out how to go around the moon and come back to Earth. So there's all these steps that had to be made in order to accomplish the ultimate goal of landing on the moon.
But the all of the test flights that NASA was doing, the Gemini and Mercury test flights, those never went out of low Earth orbit, though, correct?
They were in Earth orbit, and they would go as far as they could outside of Earth. If they would try and do some sophisticated maneuvers further away from Earth, but yeah, they didn't go to deep cislunar space or the moon. That's for Gemini. Mercury, they were just in they were just in Earth orbit, and X-15, they were barely in Earth orbit. They were like suborbit, so they were like just outside the atmosphere, kind of.
Yeah, it's just interesting because I've watched a lot of rocket scientists and astronauts, and they're talking about that it is very, very difficult to actually get to the moon in a standard rocket because 90% of your payload has to be gas. And that's why I believe Werner von Braun, the scientist that came over from Germany during Project Paperclip, became the head of NASA,
Hmm.
said that it would take a rocket the size of an Empire State Building to get to the moon. And that's not because it needed to be big, it was because that it
The
needed to
fuel,
have the fuel. Yeah.
yeah. I think like the liquid rocket technology is, we've really mastered it, and back then they were perfecting that for sure. There are rumors, especially within the UFO community, that um, the space program was a front, that it was, the best fossil fuel technology that was being publicized at the time, but secretly they were testing things like the ARV and, reverse engineered disk technology that possibly had anti-gravitic properties. Um, and you know, maybe sometimes the astronauts, when they were saying, "Hey, we've got a bogey," or um, "There's something up here, some lights that are unidentified. What is that?" That type of thing. They were actually seeing the ARV. It's possible. It could be that NASA was not fully read into the black budget projects of uh, the military industrial complex, that they were testing through the Navy and the Air Force in different ways, right? But um, I still think some of the stuff they might have seen might not have been from here.
So, is there any proofs or anything through your research that you found that they could have possibly been using a different form of a craft to get to the moon, whether that be like an enhancement onto the craft, some kind of anti-gravitics put onto the rocket to help it get to the moon and then back off the moon? Because Walter Bosley kind of talks about this a little bit, that he believes that there was some kind of anti-gravitics used in the lunar lander to get back from the moon. I don't know if you've seen some of that footage, but the footage of the lunar lander taking off from the moon, have you seen any of that? It
Yeah,
like
yeah.
lifts straight up off of the ground with no propulsion, nothing. It just lifts straight up,
Just go.
just go boom.
Yeah. Um, I've seen that. I think when you're in such a low gravity environment, which is the moon, you don't need a lot of thrust. I think, a small amount of thrust can create that illusion that you're almost not even using any thrust. I think, just think about the astronauts, for example, right? They have to wear spacesuits that have hundreds of pounds of weight in them to keep them grounded to the moon. And when they hop, they go quite effortlessly into the sky above the lunar surface, and then come back down due to their weight. The lander, one of the problems with the dangers of the spacecraft that they were flying in, the CSM and the lunar lander, is that the actual membrane of it was made of aluminum. It was super thin, compared to a tank exterior or something like that from our military tanks. It's not like they were using depleted uranium exteriors. They were using aluminum. So one of the things they would do, for example, when they landed on the moon, they were connected via their spacesuits to the actual craft, to the oxygen system of the craft via hoses. And the reason why they did that when they were landing was because if they landed and the membrane cracked or was cut in any way, because it was kind of delicate, that they would have a breach. Maybe the air would fly out of the like out of the actual compartment that they're in, right? It might depressurize because of this fracture or whatever, but because they were connected via hoses directly to an oxygen system, they had a backup to survive on, right? So if you think about it, they actually built the lunar lander and everything to be super lightweight. It was so if you have something that lightweight and you have a decent amount of thrust, like a small combustion, to propel yourself upwards, and you compare that to two astronauts just using their legs to jump off the lunar surface, and they seem to be propelled upwards pretty effortlessly. That's the type of gravitational environment they were in. I don't know if Walter Bosley has any papers that could prove that they outfitted the lunar module with actual anti-gravitic technology. I've never seen that, and there's all kinds of papers, from Belcom and NASA and stuff talking about how they built those craft. I don't know.
Well, I think that that was just a theory of his. I don't think that it was like 100% fact that he was saying, hey, this is exactly what it is. It was just a theory based off of the Bell technology, the German Bell craft, and then the
Yeah.
Kecksburg event of 1965 landing in Pennsylvania, which looks very similar to the Bell craft, and then the lunar lander looking similar to the shape of the Bell as well. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, like that goes towards the theory, like, were we seeing an ARV that was being tested concurrently with the with the Apollo space program? Because people also have to realize that, like, the X-15 missions were happening, the Mercury missions were happening, there was overlap there. The Gemini missions were happening, overlapping with Mercury, and then they were testing this brand new Apollo spacecraft at the exact same time that they were finishing the Gemini space missions. So there was overlap. And, if you think about the American military and how they operate, how they build things, and what they're capable of doing, there's probably some overlap with, you know, uh, stealth bomber technology and maybe some anti-gravitic uh, aircraft and spacecraft technology that was being tested at the same time.
So how far along do you think? Because we mentioned it just a little bit earlier about the secret space program and missions going on in space with these craft that we've created. We've either created them or reverse engineered them in some way. I personally believe that we created them. And because if you look back at the Sonora Aero Club in the early 1800s in Northern California, they were working on these kinds of anti-gravitic craft back then. And then, you fast forward a little bit, Germany, like I mentioned with the Bell technology, they were working on the craft as well. So I think a lot of the craft that is being seen is our craft. Now, a very small percentage maybe is maybe some sort of other species craft. I'm not 100% convinced that they are extraterrestrials or ETs. I think maybe that they're just a more advanced species or more advanced race. I think the extraterrestrial terminology has just been tossed around, and now they just anybody that sees anything automatically assumes that it's extraterrestrial or ET
Yeah.
related when it's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
One, why are you assuming that if you see a craft, it's aliens or extraterrestrials? Two, why does anybody even have to be in the craft? Right?
Yeah.
Could it not be a drone?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I mean, I think you know, extra dimensional is an opportunity within science. You know, we interact in a three-dimensional environment, and apparently there's many dimensions higher than that, and that's scientifically proven. Um, is there an opportunity then for beings that exist within this same uh, space time to exist in a totally different dimension and not interact with us? Maybe. And sometimes we get a fleeting glimpse of them because they zap in and out of a three-dimensional uh, realm, whatever. Kind of talking out my ass here, but you know, your guess is as good as mine. I do think that there's something to people that report having experiences with, say, these gray beings. There's just so many of those accounts, you know, the very large almond shaped eyes, elongated skulls, and,
Yeah, but
you know,
what are those
they have,
grays though, Darcy? Are those grays? I think that those grays, it's just my personal opinion through my research and the work that I've done and talking with others in the community. I think that those grays, just like the craft, we've created them to be our little henchmen to go around and do work for us. And there's a genetically engineered species by us, by the
yeah.
government, by
Well,
somebody else.
the only thing I would say, it's kind of like the Walter Bosley thing, right? Like, I think right now we live in like the age of information. People like you are very astute, and we can get information from online. And a lot of us are kind of reverse engineering our theories from information we can find that comes out, right? That eventually makes it to the market of our minds. And I've never I've heard about that theory that, you know, maybe they're just some kind of automaton robotic creations that we made, but these things were showing up, you know, in paleo abduction times, like back in caveman depictions of these beings that looked non-human. And we've seen these things in abduction cases internationally, well before the 1950s, when we were hearing about, you know, nuclear explosions attracting lots of UFO activity. And then you've got things like the Betty and Barney Hill case. They didn't look like grays per se. They looked like advanced, maybe humanoids. They had sort of fleshy colored skin and massive craniums and larger eyes,
Yeah,
and
but
they wore
here's the
like sort of jumpsuits. But what I'm saying is, because you have a lot of these experiencers, right? And they describe, you know, abductees. The list is massive at this point in history. Many of them describe very similar things, and they could describe a billion things. But when you hear the same sort of stories happening with this different encounters, it's either going to be people that are actually telling the truth that, you know, tends to lend credibility that we're interacting with something that's non-human or not in the form that we are, or we're interacting with, um, or some people could just be making it up, plain and simple. It could be a story. I don't discount that as an, you know, possibility, but I'm just saying that for me, I think that when you hear about these accounts, you don't hear too often about, or if you look at the information that we have out there, how often can you sort of reverse engineer a source where we've been creating these things? I don't think we had the capabilities back then. I still don't think we have the capability, like in robotics and genetics, to create these little grays. I think one of the things too, if you like look into, say, Philip J. Corso, The Day After Roswell, one of his sort of major pronouncements in that book is that we got some technology from recovered uh, crew members of the crash during Roswell. So from the bodies they dissected, they figured out that their eyes were black, right? These big black almond shaped eyes. And part of the reason for that is that the eyes were actually a technologically advanced eye that was able to see in the dark, and they reverse engineered the eyes, the technology they found in the eye of this being, to create, what do you call it, infrared uh, night vision. And so I'm not saying that that's absolutely true, but I'm saying that this seems to be, and it might lend to your point that, maybe we're not dealing with, we are dealing with a drone or a creature that is robotic, but from another, planet, or from another plane of existence that's not human. And
Right, I agree to a certain extent, but I just want to explain the reason why I believe that, because I think that that's really important.
sure.
I'm just not throwing things out without having a reason for it. And you just mentioned Betty and Barney Hill, and that is a very, very interesting case, because if you go back and you research Betty and Barney Hill, and you go back to those original statements that Barney made, Barney said that they were military personnel, that it was the military that abducted them several
Okay.
times. His first 5 statements on the topic was that he saw military personnel, military people in military uniforms. It wasn't until they got regressed and the regressionist took them in and started kind of psychically driving them to implant thoughts and ideas into their head, and then they change their story to it being aliens and extraterrestrials. And then that is me putting together that a lot of these abductions are the military, and the military are abducting people and taking them. And the reason that they're trying to cover that up is that they've created these grays to do the abductions for them, so that people don't realize that it's actually the military that's doing it. So they don't wake up and be like, hey, that was a military officer. That would completely just throw that out the window. If you've seen some grays that were created or back engineered, you would automatically think that they were aliens.
There is like a common phenomenon where people do describe, abductees or experiencers describe seeing two different versions, right? Like as if what they're seeing is a projection. So, for example, Travis Walton, and his case is very, very interesting too. He said he was aboard the craft when he first came to, he first awoke on the craft. He saw, these gray alien looking things, massive eyes, all, big craniums, no hair, uh, kind of frail looking. And he picked up like a pipe or something and was swinging at them. They backed out of the room. He walked around the craft after that, didn't see them, and then later was sitting inside some kind of chair and was approached by two very attractive looking humans wearing these like super tight fitting blue jumpsuits. And when I interviewed him some years ago, he stated uh, that he believed the second encounter he had on the ship with these human looking folks were probably a projection, because he felt a lot less defensive. He actually tried talking to them for a little while. They didn't respond. He didn't get any psychic, thoughts beamed to him or anything. They were just dead silent. They led him back to the room. They put some gas on him. Apparently, he passed out. So, I mean, it's also possible that what Betty and Barney Hill had seen was a projection of some kind. And they did actually sort of unpack that properly, that experience, later on when they were hypnotically regressed. I've never been hypnotized. I don't really know if that's 100% foolproof, technology in terms of extracting perfect information. But
It's not, because you can be suggested ideas and thoughts by the hypnotherapist. They can implant thoughts and ideas into your, let's say you're in a hypnotic state, right? And you said something and you're like, oh yeah, it was the military. And then the hypnotic regressionist just slips in, are you sure? They're leading them. It's leading questions. That's basically
well,
what hypnotic regression is just leading people into creating a story.
Sure, I can agree to some degree. I'm skeptical about hypnosis, but look at the Ariel school phenomenon, that case where many, many, many people saw this craft land in broad daylight behind a school in where was it? It was in Africa. I can't remember which country, but
That was swamp gas, though, Darcy. Don't you know?
oh, J. Allen Hynek, look at you. But look, it landed, and when John Mack flew out there, Harvard psychiatrist, he didn't hypnotize these kids. He just asked them straight up, "What did you see?" And they described the craft. They described these beings kind of moving really strangely in different speeds that didn't seem human around the craft. But then when they described their heads, some of these witnesses described large, almond, bald cranium, gray type beings. Like they looked non-human. They looked very odd to these kids. Some of them described them having long hair on top of this like strange looking head with like oblong shaped, almond shaped eyes. And my mind tends to think that it was a projection that these kids were seeing, and the mind of each of these kids was perceiving a little bit different based on what these beings wanted them to see, or what these beings perceived would be okay for them to see. I don't know for sure, but again, there's just so much testimony. There's so many cases where we hear about these things, and where, at least if we look at our history in terms of science and, UFO sightings and that whole phenomenon, we tend to hear about very repeatable cases of flying saucers, tic-tac or cigar-shaped UFOs. Before Major Fravor, they were always a cigar-shaped UFO in my mind. Now it's tic-tac. You hear about triangular craft. When you hear about so many cases of this, there's something to that phenomenon, right? So when you
Yeah,
hear
but
about so many,
you're applying the same kind of logic that just completely destroyed the secret space program and the super soldier community, though. You're saying that all these
there
people's
wasn't there
testimony
wasn't
is
but
is creating
but
this story, but there's a very large group of people in the secret space program and the super soldiers that believe that they went to Mars and fought aliens. So if you're applying the
but
same
not
kind of,
enough. Not enough. Not, thousands of people having testimony of the same thing. We're talking about the UFO phenomenon here, right? Which has spanned thousands of years at this point. If you think about, paleo sightings compared to modern day sightings, right? So there's a continuity of actual history there. The 20 and backers, there's no continuity. This is all brand new information. This is a LARP. This is something that came in the past 10 years. So we can't compare 10 years of stories to thousands of years of stories, Ryder. Come on.
I was just playing devil's advocate there, but like, but I think there's a few different kinds of things that we're really touching on here. We're talking about a bunch of different topics. We're
Yeah.
kind of bouncing back and forth between the UFO phenomena, aliens, and then abductions.
Yeah.
Right. Now you probably have more information on this than me, but the very first abduction that became popular was Betty and Barney Hill that I can think of. That there was actual real that was like put out into the media. So there really were no abductions from an actual craft, and that happened after World War II. That was what year was that? It was the early 60s or
There
50s.
was Antonio Boaz in Brazil. Let me see.
But I agree with you in saying that the UFO phenomenon goes back much further.
Antonio Villas Boas, a Brazilian farmer who claimed to have been abducted by extraterrestrials in 1957.
Still after World War II.
Yes, but this is a case not a lot of people know about, and he was 23 years old at the time. It was October. He saw what he described as a red star, and it approached his position, growing in size. Sooner or later, he realized it was an egg-shaped aerial craft, and it extended 3 legs, landed, and he was taken aboard a craft. And this happened pre-Betty and Barney Hill. The thing about Betty and Barney Hill is that this was the first major American story that became a massive media sensation because, they were a mixed race couple. They had an extremely strange claim to make, and people listened. And the thing about that case is that the Air Force got involved, the Navy got involved. There was all kinds of research happening scientifically around their case. They took readings from their car and found strange electromagnetic traces, radiation coming off of the hood of their car. And their
that
car
would mean that it would be some kind of our technology. That was the exact same thing. That was the exact same problem that the Germans had during World War II. They had a radiation problem coming off of their
You're
craft.
talking about the Nazi Bell, right?
The Bell and the Hannibal, both of those, they had a really bad radiation problem. Anytime an occupant would get inside of their craft, they were basically committing suicide because the radiation would kill them. So if it's a radiation,
but I
thing,
thought that I thought the Nazi Bell, didn't technically actually have any crew members. That was just something that they were anchoring to cement pillars and were trying to fly off. And apparently, Joseph Walker said that it had gotten free and maybe flew off into space or something, and they lost track of it. Am I right?
Well, from my understanding, the Bell technology, the Glocka was a component of the craft. It was like the engine of the craft, and it was using a red spinning Mercury. And by itself, no, it doesn't really do anything but lift off of the ground. Which to me, that means that it's like the drive of the engine is the thing that makes the craft lift up off of the ground. So they're missing the other component to the craft, and that's probably why they left it behind in Germany. They were like, hey, they don't have the rest of the craft, whatever. It's like kind of like a prototype or whatever. We'll just leave it behind. Who cares?
I made that documentary Rise of the TR-3B, right? Which is part of this whole sort of secret space saga that I've been building. And Edgar Rothschild Fouché, he came quite famously in the 90s, the early 90s, to the UFO community and said, I worked out at Area 51. Um, and Jeremy Reese, a guy who has a channel called Alien Scientist on YouTube, he actually met with him, and another friend who actually tipped me off to all this. Um, they became quite close to Edgar Rothschild Fouché before he passed away. This friend of mine named Dave Benkert, and um, they stated that what he was saying was pretty true because they actually um, verified that he might have actually worked at Area 51. And his testimony was that the TR-3B used this more advanced technology, this more advanced version of what came out of the Nazi Bell. So it had this uh, super cooled rotating mercury superconductor engine in the middle of the craft that caused the anti-gravitic lift for it to, you know, lift a massive metallic craft into the sky that was a triangle. And this was supposed to be a secret space program craft because it was supposed to take personnel and um, possibly heavy equipment to space with anti-gravitic propulsion. And the actual technology of the engine was called an MFD, a magnetic field disruptor. And it's super spinned, and it used this mercury-based super cooled superconductor apparently, which NASA's they've actually done some work on superconductors, but apparently none of it's gone anywhere, and they've never published anything officially like to say that it works um, to a certain degree, to that degree. And but this craft may have made its maiden flight in 1979, and um, the thrusters, the corners of the craft that actually made it propel into certain directions, were operating on a hydrogen fuel jet. So more of a, towards a fossil fuel, not a fossil fuel, but a water fuel, jet fuel, right? Water-based jet fuel. And look, we've got so many accounts of these strange triangular craft flying around our skies. There's so many videos, there's so many, dead silent, hovering over neighborhoods. This is technology that is just not in the public yet it's being caught on the camera by multiple individuals all around the planet. Uh, so, and then you got the Phoenix Lights and stuff. People say, oh, maybe the Phoenix Lights was a TR-3B. I talked to James Fox. He said, well, the weird thing about that is that he talked to hundreds and hundreds of witnesses when he made I Know What I Saw. He flew out to Phoenix, Arizona, and tracked the accounts all across the state. This thing flew, I think, started in Nevada and flew across Arizona, right? And so people that were witnessing this, not only was this miles across in the sky, okay, this is bigger than anything that we know we could house at this point in some kind of like underground base. How are you going to house something that's miles across in size? And then, second of all, people were recalling having psychic communications, right? And that's not something we usually get from witnesses of something that might be more terrestrial in nature. They see a triangular, hovering, cloaked, silent craft on their camera, but they can't hear voices in their head or anything like that, right? So I think there's two versions of things happening. It's very possible, Ryder, that we have our own craft that is technology similar to what you're talking about, originated with the Nazi Bell technology and has advanced since then. But we also have possible visitors that are more advanced, that are non-human. Whether they're some kind of androids from a different, you know, place and time in the universe or in space or in dimensionally, I don't know. Um, but you know, we might not be using these physical husks the same way that we do now, 100 to 1,000 years from now. Maybe technology will take us to a point where, we don't even need our reproductive junk and stuff anymore, and we're just walking around like gray aliens. I don't know.
Yeah, it's highly possible. I just think that we've lumped a lot of this stuff under the exact same banner. I tend to look at all of these different phenomenons as different and not related. Right? I think that the UFO phenomenon isn't related to aliens, and I don't think that the abduction phenomenon is related to aliens either. I think that they're all separated out, and we've all just kind of lump them all in because we don't understand any of it, and we tend to blanket it all under the exact same phenomenon, right? When there's much more going on in each one of these levels, like you were mentioning earlier, you said, well, the UFO phenomenon goes back a really long time, but the abduction phenomenon doesn't. Right now, there were like abduction, of people thought that there were mystical beings and that they were being abducted by, creatures and stuff like that, which could translate to some sort of extraterrestrial. I just think that we've been lumping everything all into the same category without realizing that it's all different. I don't know.
Well, there's paleo abductions, right? So Colonel H.G. Shaw in 1895 published an account in the California Daily Mail that he was harassed by three tall, slender humanoids whose bodies were covered in fine, downy hair, and the beings tried to accost or kidnap him and his friend, but they fought them off. In 1923, American writer Charles Fort speculated that extraterrestrial beings might have kidnapped humans. Um, and I don't think he actually was abducted, but yeah, I mean, like you have cases that predate, um,
Yeah, but are they talking
that
about UFOs though too, right?
you look at uh, the Book of Enoch. That's essentially an abduction story, right? I'm not religious in any way, shape, or form, but if that story of a human being that lived at one time in history, you know, more than 2,000 years ago, a great grandfather of, uh, King David in the Middle East stated that he was taken to the heavens and he was greeted by these beings. It wasn't like he was introduced to one singular, version of God that we all describe. He went to a realm where he was greeted by multiple intelligences that taught him things that he handed down to humanity, right? These are stories that go back and are now written into our history that are a different version of abduction, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I don't think that you can look at a religious text as having historical value. I don't think that it's meant to be taken as a historical thing. It's a metaphor and an allegory. Pretty much all historical texts are all metaphors and
but
allegories.
but all religious texts by the hardcore believers and disciples of that religion take that as historically accurate. You can't say that to folks that walk around Mecca, every year, where apparently Abraham stepped his last foot and then went to the heavens, went to the stars, so to speak. That place is very sacred to them, and they take that as historical fact that that place which has a massive asteroid encased in it, was the last place that he stepped on Earth before leaving. And you can't say to the Christians that Jesus wasn't a man that walked the earth, right? These are supposed to be historical figures. I'm just giving you an example of what people have said have happened in the past. My interpretation is just a little bit different, you know?
Yeah, but just because people think that it's fact and that it's real doesn't make it fact and real. It doesn't make it a part of history. Like I can say whatever I want to say, and I've been saying that it's allegorical and metaphorical since I started my channel, and speaking publicly. But I get what you're saying. I understand, what you're getting at. But
Yeah.
just because someone believes in something, and there's a group of people that believe in it, just like we were talking about earlier with the secret space program assets and super soldiers, doesn't mean that it's
Yeah.
real, doesn't mean that it's
Yeah.
fact.
There's you know, always going to be a religion component where it becomes hardcore belief and less so fact that people are following a story with. And, I agree that that really muddies the water of truth and reality. But um, still might be some fact in there somewhere. Like the fact that the secret spacer 20 and backer duties have had had such a successful run in convincing people that they actually did these things is because of the sheer fact that there is a UFO phenomenon. It's because of the sheer fact that there are these strange things happening in space. They just built a layer on top of that stronger foundation, and now we're watching it crumble. And that's the thing. History will always repeat itself where new ideas come, and the ones that are fickle and false will fall apart after time, and everybody will see that.
I agree 100%. Now, before I let you go tonight, let's talk a little bit about what these astronauts actually saw, which is in your documentary, which you can watch it for free. I highly recommend people to watch it. Darcy does, he's putting together really, really good work. And unlike, other people in the community just making stuff up, Darcy actually has information backing what he's talking about. And I respect that a lot. So, what were some of these objects and some of these things that these astronauts were seeing during these test flights before they actually went to the moon?
So Joe Walker, Robert White, these were the X-15 mission astronauts, the very first designations of astronauts. They saw, UFOs. They saw flying objects. Sometimes they describe them as a disc-shaped or white, large, round-shaped objects. Sometimes five of them above their craft in space. So in official orbit, um, tracking their activity as they were flying that high. You know, and their testimony was included in the doc, both as written testimony and secondhand testimony. So part of the written testimony that we have is from Life magazine, where they were interviewed by Life magazine reporters. Because the thing is, a lot of these missions were being covered. For example, Mercury and Gemini and Apollo, these were all being covered by mainstream press. So press were trying to be around these test flights or trying to be around this activity to report what happened when they went up. And when NASA was radioed back by the pilots as seeing things up there, that would leak its way to the press, often by NASA employees. And then those questions would be asked by, journalists that work for magazines and stuff like that. And in this case, it was Life. And one of the astronauts reported what he saw, how he didn't understand it. A later astronaut in the X-15 mission stated at a conference that, and he actually snuck some photos into his presentation of the actual craft that they saw, that was a massive, glowing disc-shaped craft hovering above Earth's atmosphere when he was at apogee flying in the X-15. That's like near space conditions, near outer space conditions. And um, he said that part of his actual task that was given to him by NASA was to take more photos and track the activity of UFOs when he went to space. And, you know, if you believe an astronaut's testimony like that, that's pretty incredible stuff. That means that NASA has known about UFOs and has been researching them from their very first space missions back in 1960, 1961, 1962, when the X-15 missions were, at full scale testing. Then you go to Mercury. In Mercury, we had Alan Shepard. He was the famous astronaut to first ride around in the capsule outside of the Earth's orbit, in outer space in orbit. And, he reported that he was seeing these illuminating objects that went on for miles, that were floating around his craft, but also drifting off in space. Um, that turned out to be actually just molecules, like kind of like space ice, but not water, which is NH2O. It was just nitrogen frozen. And that was coming off of a tank and freezing to the side of the capsule, and then flaking off. And because of the sun glinting in this as it floated around, and you're in a zero oxygen, you're in a space environment, the sun shines through that and it illuminated like it was a firefly or something. So that ended up um, being dubbed the firefly uh, phenomenon, right? And this was observed in other missions, and there is sort of like space ice that floats out there, even in the STS missions, the space shuttle missions that are more modern. Um, Even around the ISS, they see space ice. This is normal. But this was the very first time that this was seen, and it had a very like War of the Worlds type effect. When people heard this over their radios and stuff, they thought maybe we're not alone. Maybe there's aliens and little critters and stuff like that floating around in space that can exist, that can thrive up there that we can't. Then you go to Scott Carpenter. In the film, we kind of speculate that Scott Carpenter might have been fired because he was focusing on a UFO sighting more than focusing on his mission checklist and trying to re-enter into Earth's atmosphere in a timely manner on his schedule, because people don't realize that all of these missions are tightly scheduled so that they can get through these checklists of things to be done, so they can go do what they're supposed to do out there and then re-enter and get back to the planet. We speculate that he got fired because NASA wanted to make an example out of Scott Carpenter so that future generations of astronauts that were going to be on the Gemini missions and the Apollo space missions knew, don't mention that stuff when you're up there, because if this gets out to the public, it can cause hysteria, it can cause problems for us. We don't want that attention, and keep it quiet, right? So it's a possibility. Then we go into Gemini, and at this point, we have the astronauts being trained, just like the X-15 pilots, to take as much footage as they could when they were in space as possible. So they both used motion picture DAC footage, which are kind of like little 8mm, 16mm, or 24mm film cameras that were specially designed to be used in space. the highest quality, the most efficient, uh, compact system so that the astronauts can just quickly run and gun. And they also had custom designed Hasselblads, which were like the best DSLR camera on the planet at the time. Also custom designed to make sure that they could take really high quality photos from a relatively amateur uh, camera man, right?
Now,
So
have these photos been released at all?
yeah, many of the photos have been released, and we pour through the photos and examine anomalies. We examine things that might be actual either cover-ups of things that are in Earth's atmosphere or things that are floating in space around the capsule. In other words, possible UFO sightings that they had taken photos of. And if we listen to the X-15 pilots that said that was part of our mission parameters to take photos of anomalies like this, well, we see anomalies in the pictures, then one could logically deduce these astronauts were actually taking pictures of these things intentionally because they were seeing things that were weird. Um, then they were taking motion picture footage. And actually, a lot of the craft were outfitted with camera systems as well, not just the run and gun stuff that the astronauts had to use themselves. And all of our space missions, all of our crafts, even the shuttles, Columbia and Endeavour, they were all outfitted with cameras. The Canadian Space Arm had a camera on the end of it. Like, they built these things to make sure that they could observe everything they can out there and record everything they can, because science and humans make discoveries through observation, right? This is, repeatable observation proves theories. And so in the Gemini space missions, two things happened that we kind of unpack. And I got a lot of this information again from a friend, Carrie Martinuk. Um, and some of the information I got from another guy, Tracy Starnes. He got pictures from a university dump of space photos. And sometimes the universities have different versions of photos that were taken on Apollo missions as well as the Gemini missions, because NASA back then did release some stuff uncensored to universities. And later on, those universities released them, forgetting to go through a NASA censorship program. And people have reported for a long time that NASA, Donna Hare is pretty famous for saying that she observed NASA employees blotting out, inking out, primitively photoshopping out anomalous objects in space photography. And another person who observed that, a CBS correspondent who was a science advisor at the time in the 1960s, was Richard C. Hoagland. And he would be in JPL and stuff like that and see assistants doing this sort of thing. Well, we looked at a lot of that photography and we tried to find anomalies from Gemini, and all of those missions went right up to 11. They also had anomalies that were being reported via recordings or Capcom transcribed communications between the astronauts and ground control. And that came out through this machine called the VTR. So, all of our modern aircraft flights these days have what's called a black box. If the aircraft goes down, they can salvage the craft, they can get the black box back, and there's telemetry, flight recorded data, as well as audio recordings, so they can hear and sort of understand what happened right up until the moments that the craft went down. Well, all of the capsule missions, they had that type of technology built in just in case something went wrong, they could recover possibly the VTR, and they could figure out what they saw, what happened out there before their demise, right? But in the VTR transcriptions, those were declassified. And again, why does anything that comes out of NASA have to be classified, right? But these VTR transcripts were declassified 12 years after the Gemini missions finished. And on top of that, they probably didn't get out to the public that easily. They were only uploaded many years later to NASA archives to be accessible by the public. And we pour through those transcripts and we hear the astronauts talking about seeing weird things out there, lights they can't describe, something went by their window, and you know, a bogey. A bogey is one of the famous things that was described being seen up there, and a bogey is nomenclature for an enemy craft or an unidentified craft that's in airspace that is not supposed to be there.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And I'm really interested in the work that you're doing, Darcy. That's wonderful information. You're going through a lot of different things. So my last question before we wrap it up tonight, I think I might have asked it a little bit earlier, but what is it that you believe that we're really doing in space? Like what is actually up there for us to actually be there? Because from my understanding, which this is just a rumor in which I've heard several people say in the early 2000s, there were people coming out and talking about this, that the Apollo missions wasn't just a mission to go to the moon. The Apollo missions were originally supposed to go to the moon and to other planets to set up some sort of military base or some kind of presence in our solar system and on neighboring planets.
Well, I mean, if you talk to Andrew Basiago, him and Barack Obama, they actually went to Mars. Nah, I'm just joking. Um, Look, I think there's early papers that prove that the motivation was there to militarize space quite early on. In fact, we include a document in the documentary that goes through uh, Apollo's early plans in the late 1950s to basically create crew and equipment carriers and nuclear bomb dropping technology that operated from outer space. So yeah, there's definitely been that motivation there. Whether they did it or not, I mean, that would basically be illegal. I think you're not supposed to have nuclear armaments in space. It's against international law. But who knows? If you do have that, you do have supremacy over your enemy, and I'm sure the military is uh, probably inching their way to military supremacy every year that's gone by since the 1940s, to make sure that they have a technical advantage over enemy adversary countries. But what's actually been happening in space, I think, is a number of things. It's my opinion that some of the stuff we see up there is possibly our technology that's being tested out. That's not a fossil fuel based technology. It's something like Nazi Bell derivative. And then some of the stuff might be extraterrestrial. I know you don't like that word, but it's a possibility in my mind. I don't think we're alone in the universe. And I think if somebody has, advanced technologically well beyond we have, and their intelligent life, um, well beyond our intellect at this point in time, who's to say they haven't come to pay us a visit in the past and currently are? And then some of the stuff very possibly could be um, autonomous drone and relic technology from an ancient sort of civilization. I like that idea because, you know, you look at um, journalists like Graham Hancock, who believes that you know, there's a story behind our history that's not being told properly, and we may have been existing on this planet for a lot longer. Um, who's to say that a cataclysmic event hasn't brought us to our knees technologically and intellectually in the past and reset everything? And we've already been through this cycle before where we've had even better technology than what we have now, better organization of our people on the planet. We were more in harmony with the environment, possibly, but we at the same time had great technology and therefore had a space program in the past. And some of that relic technology that's autonomous, that is still operating today, is being found around the moon, maybe around Mars, maybe other places in the solar system, kind of carrying out its tasks and continuing to go on. Uh, and we were capturing glimpses of that, and our astronauts are sending these cryptic messages back about that. And you know, it leaves us in a bit of awe and wonder to unpack what's actually going on out there. um, I don't know if disclosure is, you know, the way it eventually will go on in the public will validate any of this.
Thanks so much, Darcy. Appreciate you coming on my show. I love the conversation. Really enjoyed it. Can you let people know where to find you online and where to find your documentary as well?
Yeah, sure. All like pretty much 90% of my films, I've got 12 films that are available on tubetv.com. People can watch that for free. You know, all of them very different in quality and subject matter. So, you know, enjoy yourself. I have fun with my documentary making. Um, and I have a website, occultjourneys.com, on Instagram, Darcy Weir Films, and yeah, Twitter, the same thing. Thanks for having me on, Ryder. It's been a great convo. Always
I
good to talk with you, man.
appreciate you a lot. I'll have to bring you back on sometime in the future. The links to all of Darcy's information will be in the description of this video. For everyone else, thanks for watching and listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel in the YouTube algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. The link to my channel on Rokfin is in the description. Sign up over there. Hit the follow button for my premium content. And you can catch this episode and any of my other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and download them directly to your device for free on Spreaker.com. Remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep loving your heart for everyone. Stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time. This is a special message.
Greetings to everyone at Raised by Giants podcast in California, and a very special hello to my friend Ryder Lee, someone who I've had a pleasure to speak with many different times off camera, including on camera on his very podcast in January of 22. My name is Anthony. I'm an extra dimensional channeler of a Theta Tauran race, and I'm located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, the very same city of Toronto, where I have a brand new podcast called Canadian Awareness Podcast, launched in November of 22. And with this message, I wish to invite everyone at Raised by Giants podcast to take a look at my new podcast and some of the interviews I've conducted, but also many that I plan on doing in 23, and speaking to and conversing with different brilliant minds of this industry of channeling, ufology, extraterrestrial contact, spirituality, and talking about some of the most controversial but also deep galactic, cosmic, interstellar subject, variety of different intelligences that I plan on discussing, concentrating on the most important thing, and that is which is the aim and the mission of the podcast, which is human empowerment. So again, I wish to invite everyone to take a look at Canadian Awareness Podcast, and find out for yourself if you resonate with what we have to say, and I hope to see you all there.